Welcome back to the channel. In my never-ending quest for the perfect adventure bike, I recently did something I never thought I would do. Something a little impractical, but a ton of fun. Something orange. Now, I'm a pretty practical rider, and so reliability has always been at the top of my list when selecting an adventure motorcycle, especially one that I'm going to take to remote places and oftentimes by myself. And given their less than sterling reputation for reliability, I really never thought that there would be a KTM in my motorcycle stable. But the idea of a 350-pound motorcycle that could make 74 horsepower, designed for off-road thrills, but modifiable to potentially be a credible long-distance adventure tour, that was just an idea I could not get out of my mind. Those of you that have been following the channel will know that I spent the last 5 years building out and adventuring on this very capable 2017 Honda Africa Twin. With all the modifications I put into this bike, it really has become a pretty incredible adventure tourer. But there's really no modification I could make to it that would make it not weigh 540 pounds when you include the weight of the protection and accessories and everything like that. And as I've become more experienced as a rider, I've started taking it places where it really probably doesn't belong, at least not when piloted by a very average rider like myself. When it's moving, it feels fantastic, but when you get into that slow, tight stuff, or when you have to dig it out of an arroyo, or you have to pick it up for the umpteenth time, you really start to feel the weight. And even when I'm just riding out by myself, sometimes in remote places, I always have in the back of my mind, you know, if I drop this thing just the wrong way, I may not be able to recover it on my own, and then I'll be stuck. And so I've always dreamt of a lighter adventure bike, something around 400 pounds or less, but that would still be capable of long distance travel and even freeway days when called upon to do so. And there's really not that many options when you really think about it that can deliver on that. And I do think that the later model KTM690 Enduro Rs may be capable of that. Certainly not straight out of the box, but with some strategic modifications, and that will be the topic of this video. Before we get into all the mods, let's just take a moment to appreciate what you get straight out of the box with the stock platform. It's incredibly light at 350 pounds. It makes 74 horsepower at the crank, which is pretty incredible for a single-cylinder engine. It has fantastic WP suspension that is appropriately sprung for a reasonably sized rider, fully adjustable, 10.5 inches of clearance, 10 inches of travel, so excellent suspension. It has a hydraulic clutch. It has very simple but useful electronics, including switchable ABS, switchable traction control, and a couple of simple rider modes. Most importantly, in the later models, starting with 2019, KTM modified this bike, modified the engine to reduce some of the vibration at high RPM. And that, for the first time, I think, made it a credible candidate as a long-distance travel bike. Now, certainly it's not perfect. Out of the box, it has no wind protection to speak of. The ergonomics, both sitting and standing, are really designed for aggressive riding, maybe shorter days in an aggressive crouch. Not ideal for long days in the saddle or on the pegs. The seat is atrocious. The gas tank only has 3.6 gallons. In my real-world testing, that gives you a range from as low as 132 miles to about 160 miles. This is exacerbated by the fact that the bike only takes premium high-octane gas, so it's really easy to imagine how one might get stuck. All it would take is for one remote gas station to be closed, or not even closed, just out of high-octane gas, and you would be stuck. And in fact, that has happened to us. And finally, given the off-road bias of this bike, it's really surprising how lacking the protection is. And that is a high priority modification if you're going to use it for its intended purpose off-road. So now this specific KTM690 has been heavily modified to address some of those gaps, primarily by the previous owner. I bought it secondhand, but I've made some of my own contributions to sort of polish things off and make it suitable for myself. This is going to be a rather long video because there's a lot of modifications to cover. But we'll split it up into chapters, and so you can skip ahead based on what you're interested in. I'll break it up into 3 sections: comfort and ergonomics, protection, and then optimizing the bike's performance for long-distance travel. So let's get into it. In terms of comfort and ergonomics, well, out of the box, as I already mentioned, the bike has no wind protection to speak of, and that's the first thing you're going to want to address if you're going to do long-distance travel on this bike. So this bike is outfitted with the Rade Garage K5 carbon adventure fairing, and it does a nice job of offering a good bit of wind protection. It gives you a very significant upgrade in terms of lighting with 2 bright LED lights. It gives you a dash, including an optional 12-volt charging port. This thing here is a Cutman gauge. It's not part of the fairing, it's an extra item, but it gives you a readout on things like RPM, gear selection, and oil temperature. None of those things are available with the stock display unit. So there's a few options available for fairings for this bike. I really like the Rade Garage one. I like the way it looks. I think it fits nicely with the aesthetic of the bike. It gives, again, good wind protection, upgrade to the lighting, a nice dash. It's really well made, and the instructions make it really easy to install, and they have very good support. So I do recommend it. Staying in the cockpit area, we have the BRP vibration dampening handlebar mounts. What these do is they have an elastomer built into them that reduces the amount of vibration that's transmitted through the handlebars, as the name would imply. I can't speak to how much of a difference they've made because I didn't own the bike before they were installed, but I will say I was blown away by how little vibration was transmitted through the bars once I got this bike, given that it's a single-cylinder bike. Even at high RPMs, it's quite comfortable. I did take it a step further by adding these grip pads, which helped a little bit more. And if you wanted to take it even a step further, you can add additional bar end weight, but I really don't think this is necessary. The vibrations are quite acceptable at the handlebars. The other thing about this BRP mount is it gives you the option to increase rise by 10 to 20 millimeters. I'm 5'10", and I did find it helpful to add 10 millimeters of rise to go from that more aggressive crouch position that the bike is sort of designed for ergonomics-wise to a more neutral standing position that you want for long days of travel on the pegs. So now we've got some wind protection, our hands are comfortable. What about the feet? Well, when I got the bike, it was already upgraded to these Fast Company adventure pegs, and they are really nice. They're much bigger than the stock, gives you a nice wide platform. They have excellent grip. They are hollow through the middle so that dirt and mud can fall through. And most importantly, they have that vibration dampening elastomer similar to what the BRP bar mounts have to reduce vibration coming through the pegs. The challenge is that they mount at the stock height. And again, I found that at the stock height, I was being pushed too forward into a crouch position. I wanted that more neutral stance. So I replaced the Fast Company pegs with these Rade Garage lowered pegs. These are about 15 millimeters lower. And combined with the 10 millimeters of additional rise on the handlebars, they gave me that neutral position that I was looking for. They also have a nice wide platform. They have good grip. They have the hollowed out surface so that mud and dirt can fall through. But they don't have that elastomer built in to reduce vibration transmission that the Fast Company ones do. I don't have a problem with these. I think the vibration that comes through is minimum and very tolerable. I do run D30 Icon inserts in my boots, which are meant to reduce some vibration, and those help. And so if you don't like how much vibration is coming through the pegs, you can try those as a cheap and simple solution. Once the pegs are lowered, the next problem is the brake pedal. Of course, the brake pedal is adjustable, so you can lower its position, but to get it to a point where you can cover the brake comfortably when you're seated with these lower pegs, you would really have to lower it out of the specifications that KTM provides for, and I didn't want to do that. So I got this lowered foot pedal from Knigh Design. It drops the surface of the foot pedal by 1 inch, which is plenty, together with these lowered foot pegs, and works great and allowed me to get that pedal into the position that's needed. It also has a higher surface, so when you're riding off-road, you're able to cover the brake in the standing position. So if you do get the lower pegs, I would also recommend this modification. So now the standing position's dialed in. What about sitting? The stock seat on this bike is terrible. It's a typical dual sport seat that assumes, I think, relatively short days on the bike. It assumes a lot of moving around and shifting position when you're sitting, and a lot of time spent standing on the pegs. And that's fine, but if you spend a couple of hours on the freeway where you're locked into one position sitting on this seat, it really starts to feel like a torture device. And so really a priority upgrade. This bike has been upgraded to the Seat Concept seat, which gives you a firmer, plusher padding and a wider rear sort of seating platform so that you have more options in terms of moving around on the bike. It has lots of different options in terms of the upholstery and the covering, and I find that this setup gives me a good balance between grip and the ability to move around on the bike. They do make a low seat version, and I thought I would need this because the seat height of this bike is quite high at 36.5 inches. But because the bike is so narrow, actually the reach to the ground is not bad, even in stock seat height. It's interesting because there's a 2-inch difference between this bike and my Africa Twin, but because that bike is so much wider, I find that I can reach the ground almost as easily on this bike as I can on the Africa Twin. So I didn't go with the lower seat option, but I have a 32-inch inseam, so if your inseam is much shorter than that, you may consider the lower seat option. The other item I wanted to mention are these tank grips. They're not actually tank grips because the tank's on the back on this bike, so I'll call them fairing grips. I was very used on the Africa Twin to having this big voluptuous tank at the front that I could grip with my knees for stability. And so when I started riding this bike, I really missed that because, again, the tank's in the back, you have this very narrow fairing at the front, and it was just, I had no grip with my knees and I found myself kind of bouncing all over the place. So this grip pad is from a company called Stompgrip. They come pre-cut for the bike, which is nice, makes installation easy. And they have 4 different levels of grippiness. This is the icon pattern, which is the second least grippy type. And I find that this is plenty and certainly much better than the naked plastics and gives you a very nice grip when you're riding. So that's it for comfort and ergonomics. Let's move on to protection. Out of the box, the bike comes with very little protection to speak of, which is odd given that it's meant to be an off-road biased bike. In terms of handguards, this bike just comes stock with the plastic ones, which I call wind guards or brush guards. They're fine for protecting your hands from the wind, but they won't do anything in the event of a crash. They're very likely to break. They won't protect your hands. They won't protect the levers. And so these were replaced with the Cycra Pro handguards. And I will say that you have to be careful because if you're running the BRP bar mounts, not all handguards will be compatible with those. And the Cycra Pro are, with some finagling. I did have to shave down the plastic cover perches on the clutch and the brake just to be able to get the controls at the angle that I wanted them. But this is not a big deal. It's a 2-second job and doesn't deform the bike or anything very much. And then because people do ask, no, they do not interfere with the fairing. Even at full tilt, the guards do clear the fairing, so don't worry about that. Staying up at the handlebars, let's just talk about the mirrors because while it's not really crash protection, it does improve the crash worthiness of the bike. When I got the bike, it came with these Aarrow foldable mirrors, which I really, really like. They're very small, very sleek. They, I think, match the aesthetic of the bike very nicely. They do fold away so that if you crash the bike, they'll fold out of the way, or you could fold them out of the way proactively. So I was really excited about them, and then when I started riding the bike, I found I just couldn't get them adjusted in a way that gave me the visibility that I wanted, and so I ended up taking them off and just replacing them with the double take mirrors that I run on my Africa Twin. These are tried and true. They're fantastic mirrors, fully adjustable. They fold away in the event of a crash, very rugged, and work great. The next piece of protection we have on the bike are these Outback Motortek Crashbars. They came already pre-installed on the bike from the previous owner, but if they hadn't, I would have gotten them. The bike is already quite narrow and designed to crash quite well. But for peace of mind, again, taking the bike out into remote places, you want to minimize the odds of damaging the radiator or other vital components. So I would have installed these. I think they're really great. They are minimalist. They weigh very little. I think they fit very nicely with the aesthetic of the bike, and so definitely recommend these. The next piece of protection that I'm not so sure I would have invested in are these Tekmo carbon fiber engine case covers. They're nice. They look nice, and they do offer a little bit of extra protection. They don't weigh very much. They already came installed on the bike, so hey, why not? But I'm not sure that would have been a priority upgrade for me. The last and critical piece of protection is the skid plate. This is a Kevlar and carbon fiber skid plate from E-Line. It came already pre-installed on the bike, and honestly, if I was building this bike from scratch, it's probably not what I would have installed, just because I have a bias for the beefier aluminum skid plates. They seem like they would offer more protection. That said, this bike has been on a bunch of rocky trails. The skid plate has taken a bunch of rocks. It's protected the bike perfectly. It's in great shape itself still, so maybe I'm becoming a little bit more open-minded about these types of skid plates. The other nice thing about them is that they fit the bike like a glove, which means you don't sacrifice very much ground clearance to it, as opposed to on the aluminum ones where you have to mount them onto a frame and you do give up quite a bit of ground clearance. And finally, and this is minor, but this material tends to dampen the engine noise, whereas the aluminum ones tend to resonate with the engine and actually amplify engine noise. And so if that's a concern and an annoyance for you, that's something to consider. And so that's it. It's a pretty minimalist protection package, certainly relative to what I have on the Africa Twin, but that's really all you need. The bike is narrow and designed to fall well, and so you don't need very much. Finally, let's move on to sort of performance and power upgrades on this bike. Now, the bike stock makes 74 horsepower at the crank at 8,000 RPM, which A, is incredible given that it's a single cylinder bike, and B, seems like it would be plenty for a bike that only weighs 350 pounds. But, you know, when you're on the freeway running those high RPMs, the bike's working hard and you do feel it. And so I think the idea is not only to increase the peak power, but actually to increase the accessibility of that power at more comfortable RPM ranges. To that end, my predecessor made extensive modifications on this bike. Step one was to upgrade the airbox under the seat and substantially improve the airflow coming into the engine. Now, in addition to improving the airflow into the engine, this airbox is more compact than the stock, which gives you some room to play with under the seat for additional storage. I just have this pouch that I use to store tools and a spare tube and things like that. The other nice thing about this airbox is you can change the air filter with no tools. You just twist these little hand screws and you can pop out the air filter and replace it with another one. To match the improved airflow into the engine, the exhaust has been substantially upgraded on this bike, including Tekmo titanium headers, a Wings titanium exhaust, and an SAS and cat delete kit. And in addition to improving the power by letting the engine breathe better, these components also save a substantial amount of weight, enough to actually offset the crash bars and the handguards and the steering damper, which is nice. So now with the engine breathing so much better, you do probably want to modify your fueling ratios to accommodate that. And so here we have a power commander set up directly from Rottweiler. The nice thing about that is they set it up for this exact exhaust and airbox setup. It actually comes with two maps. One is a performance map that lets you sort of unlock the maximum power and performance of this bike. The other one is a fuel economy map that in theory allows you to run the bike a little bit more economically because the tank is quite small. And these are switchable with this nice, simple, clean toggle switch on the handlebars. So with all of these modifications, the bike will do 80 miles an hour at about 6,400 RPM. It is a blast to ride. It's got this snarling, snappy, aggressive response with just even the slightest twist of the throttle, and I think it'll put a smile on just about anyone's face. The question is, do you need all of these modifications? They certainly make the bike very fun, but would it be fine as it is, straight out of the box, making 74 horsepower at the crank? My guess is it would be, but I haven't ridden the bike stock, so I couldn't tell you for sure. Now, power is not the only element of performance. You want to be able to stop too. The brakes on this bike are excellent as they are, stock, no modifications made to them. This thing will absolutely stop on a dime and is like night and day versus the Africa Twin. The bike does come with switchable ABS, which is nice, but it is a little fiddly. You have to hold the button for exactly 5 seconds, not more, not less. So, you know, I'd find myself at a trailhead sitting there counting down like an idiot, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, 3 1,000. And eventually you sort of get used to it, but it's really pretty annoying, and it's the same thing for the traction control. Now, the stock ABS is simple. It's front and rear on or all off. Some people like to have ABS off on the rear wheel, but still have ABS in the front. That's oftentimes referred to as off-road ABS. That's not available stock, but you can purchase a dongle from Rottweiler, which is easy, just plug and play, and that will give you that off-road ABS feature. It will also make it so that the bike remembers your last ABS setting when you turn off the ignition rather than resetting it, which can be quite annoying. So it's a nice feature. And in the pre-2017 models, it also gave you a bad fuel map, which was really valuable given the limited capacity of this tank. But post-2017, that's no longer available, probably because KTM had to make modifications to meet ever-increasing emission standards, and it wasn't compatible with that. But that's a real pity. Now, I ended up taking the dongle back out because it does not give you full ABS. You can either have off-road ABS or no ABS, but if you want front and rear, that's not available with the dongle, and I did want that for riding on-road, so I ended up pulling the dongle. The suspension on this bike is excellent out of the box. It's fully adjustable, it has a ton of ground clearance and travel, and it is actually sprung for like an average size American rider. So, you know, on most adventure bikes, the very first thing you have to do at minimum is change the springs to stiffer springs to accommodate a heavier rider than what the bikes are apparently designed for. You don't have to do that on this bike. The suspension is fantastic right out of the box, which is really nice. One thing you may consider is a steering damper. The forums are full of people complaining about head wobble at freeway speeds on this bike. I don't know if it's the geometry or the fact that the bike is just so light, but definitely I did experience head wobble on this bike on my very first day riding it. 80 miles an hour on the freeway, hit just a small bump, and it started wiggling all over the place, and actually was enough to move me out of the lane. Luckily, there was no one in the lane next to me, but it was a very dangerous situation. I already had the steering damper installed at that time, but I then spent a good day sort of tuning it and getting the settings just right. And after that, I've dialed out all the head wobble, and it hasn't been a problem since. So I would recommend it if you're going to travel on the freeway with this bike to get the steering damper, but don't just get it. Spend the time to actually tune it and set it up just right so it does its job. I think it's an important both safety and performance upgrade. One last upgrade I'll mention is custom. You can't really buy this on the aftermarket, but I found it to be very useful and kind of important. The kickstand on this bike is too long, in my opinion. It makes the bike naturally stand up very tall. And indeed, I had the bike get blown over on windy days. And also, it can be hard to get the bike off the kickstand when it's fully loaded and you're sitting on it. There's a gentleman that made actually a video about this that I'll link below that shows exactly how much in the opposite direction you have to lean the bike to be able to clear the kickstand. And one time I dropped the bike trying to do that. And so I was really sick of having to be like really mindful about the angle at which I parked the bike and looking for a downslope and all of that. As I started looking for shorter kickstands, and there really aren't any. I mean, there is a shorter kickstand that's made by Warp 9. It's 2 inches shorter. It's designed for the Supermoto version of this bike. It's too short. It makes the bike lean over way too much. So you have to resort to either buying these adjustable kickstands. There are some of those where you have like little notches and you can change the height. Luckily, I had a friend that was handy with a welder and was kind enough to just cut about 3/4 of an inch or an inch of length out of the kickstand on this bike and then re-weld it back together. And that has worked great. Now I don't have to worry about where I park the bike. And, you know, it's holding up fantastic and seems to be very strong. So that is something you may consider. So now with all of these extensive modifications, did we achieve the goal? Is this a good all-around traveling adventure bike? I would say yes. Is it as comfortable as my Africa Twin or other larger adventure bikes? No. Can you do long days in the saddle on this bike or on the pegs and be perfectly comfortable? Yes, you can. Indeed, I will link a video to a 1,200-mile trip that my buddy and I did on these bikes, this KTM and my Africa Twin. We had to do some super slap to get to where we were going. We did a ton of twisties. We did a 150-mile off-road day in all kinds of conditions. And the bike did fantastic. Not perfect, and you'll see that in the video, but fantastic. So I think, yes, it can be made into a credible touring adventure bike. The harder question is, which one of the bikes will I keep? This KTM690 Enduro R or my Africa Twin? And that'll be the subject of another video that's coming up where we will do a point-by-point comparison of these two bikes. It's not easy because they're not really comparable bikes, but nevertheless, we will endeavor to really give you a sense of how these two stack up, and then I will share which bike I'm choosing to leave in the stable and which one I'm going to let go. Thanks for watching. See you next time.